Channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to news.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into lots of the things that have got you talking today. Now, we all know, don't we, about the state of the NHS, and it's all well and good, isn't it, talking about the mess that it's in, but what do we do about it? Well, a pilot scheme will now trial moving patients who are not well enough to go home, but not ill enough to stay in hospital. What's it going to do with them? It's going to trial putting them into hotels to get their care there. That's a good one for my accent, isn't it? Get their care there. What do you think to that? Care hotels. Sensible idea or not? And do you remember that saying, waste not, want not? That's how it used to be anyway, but what do you think? Does it still apply? There's a few stories around today when it comes to this topic. For example, do you know, we threw away over £1 billion of food a year. £1 billion worth of food, we just chuck it away. Apparently, it's because we don't know how to cook with it. Also, separately, new rules have been announced to crack down on fly tipping. So what do you reckon? Do we throw way too much stuff away? And e-scooters. Oh, I've got to say, I've got one of these and I love it. But are they a menace to society or the future of transport? We'll have all of that to come, but first, the latest news headlines.
At just after 6 o'clock, here are your top stories from the GB newsroom. Downing Street has warned that Russia will be punished with a package of sweeping measures if its troops enter Ukraine. It comes after the US and Russia held frank talks in Geneva today to try to ease tensions. Russia's Foreign Secretary, Sergei Lavrov, insisted his country had never threatened the Ukrainian people and had no plans to invade Ukraine. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said, however, it's now up to Russia to decide whether diplomacy or conflict prevails.
So that's the choice that Russia faces now. It can choose the path of diplomacy that can lead to peace and security, or the path that will lead only to conflict, severe consequences, and international condemnation. The United States and our allies and partners in Europe stand ready to meet Russia on either path, and we will continue to stand with Ukraine.
Antony Blinken, well, here the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has called on Russia to desist and step back from Ukraine. Speaking in Australia, she said an invasion would lead to a terrible quagmire and loss of life.
They claim they want stability while they work to threaten and destabilise others. We know what lies down that path and the terrible toll in lives lost and human suffering it brings. That's why we urge President Putin to desist and step back from Ukraine before he makes a massive strategic mistake.
Liz Truss speaking in Australia. The Business Secretary has told GB News claims of blackmail by Conservative whips over the distribution of public funds are frankly ridiculous. Kwasi Kwarteng's comments follow reports that rebels are threatening to publish secret text messages and recordings from the Prime Minister's supporters.
All public spending goes through proper process. There's a proper official paper trail, if you like. There's a proper procedure through which public finance, taxpayers' money ultimately is allocated. So any idea that the Whip's office have this in their gift, I think should be challenged immediately. And clearly, if these allegations are true, that's a very, very serious allegation, and I'd want to see them properly investigated.
In other news, a suspected drug trafficker has been arrested in Spain just days after he was named as one of the UK's most wanted. 30-year-old Joshua Hendry was caught in Marbella in southern Spain after an off-duty police officer recognised him from the publicity. He's alleged to have trafficked heroin and cocaine from Liverpool to Grimsby. He'll appear in court as part of extradition proceedings. A former senior Metropolitan Police officer has been jailed for 3 years for using hidden spy cameras to film women without them knowing. Neil Corbell, a detective inspector at the time, booked models for photo shoots before planting gadgets in hotel rooms. The married father of 2 and former counter-terrorism officer was caught after one woman noticed a camera was hidden in a digital clock. He pleaded guilty to 19 voyeurism offences, which took place last September. A 33-year-old man has been charged with murdering an 86-year-old woman and trying to kill her husband. Vasile Kulea was arrested yesterday after Frida Walker was killed in the attack at her home in Derbyshire on Saturday. Her 88-year-old husband, Ken, suffered life-threatening injuries and is still in hospital. Kulea from Nottinghamshire will appear at Nottingham Magistrates Court tomorrow. More than 300 people have been rescued by the Italian Coast Guard off the island of Lampedusa. 2 patrol vessels saved the migrants who were crowded onto a 15-metre boat around 20 miles off the coast. The Coast Guard said the boat was carrying an excessive number of people and could have capsized if they hadn't got there in time. Entertainment news and Cher, Brian May and Bonnie Tyler are among some of the stars paying tribute to the US rock singer Meat Loaf, who's died at the age of 74. Meat Loaf's career, which spans 6 decades, saw him sell over 100 million albums, with hits like that, I'd Do Anything for Love, and of course the infamous Bat Out of Hell. He also starred in 65 movies, including The Rocky Horror Picture Show and Wayne's World. Queen's Brian May said he's completely gutted. Bonnie Tyler called him a one-off talent, while Cher said she had so much fun working with him. On TV, online and through your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News.
Thanks for that, Polly. Well, keeping me company until 7 o'clock. My panel. And just in case you don't know, you see, Scarlett, things have moved on at GB News now. You don't just watch GB News. Oh, no, you can listen to us as well. So if you are listening and not watching, I'll remind you throughout the programme who our panel are as well. So don't you worry if you can't see them. We've got Ben Habib, who's the CEO of First Property Group and a former Brexit Party MEP. Alistair Donald, who's the Associate Director of the Academy of Ideas, and Scarlett Maguire, who's a former Labour advisor. And also, you know the drill by now on Dewbs & Co. It's not just about us and our thoughts, it's about you at home as well and yours. You can get in touch with me on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GB News. Lots coming up on the show tonight, but before I get into some of the topics that I mentioned at the top, there's something I need to get off my chest now. If you was watching the programme earlier on this week, you will perhaps remember that we did a debate about Plan B restrictions being lifted in England. One of my panel, Sophie, actually, she was on the show, on Nana's show, just a few minutes ago, so you might have heard her again. Anyway, Sophie Corcoran, she was at school when many of these restrictions had been in place, and she was describing to the panel and to the viewers her experience of what it's like to kind of be in a school environment wearing masks and all the disruption that's gone with schools opening and closing and exams being kind of cancelled and rearranged and algorithms and all the rest of it. And to be fair to Sophie, and understandably so, she got very distressed. Now, the clip went viral all over the internet, and it really did resonate with a lot of people, parents, students, and it was viewed by nearly 2 million people so far. And as I say, in various different countries. And the main sentiment that came through was kind of relief that this was being heard and discussed and talked about, I guess, because the young people have been ignored. In a lot of this, they've been the kind of recipient of restrictions. Some would say perhaps unfairly so. Someone who certainly thinks like that there's a campaign group, Us for Them, and they actually sent an email to members of Parliament in Scotland with a link to the clip I've just mentioned from GBNews. And they sent it to the parliamentarians there saying, surely it's time now. Did you see this clip on GBNews? Look at the experience of this young person. Surely it's time now to stop the restrictions in Scottish schools. Well, a Scottish Member of Parliament, John Mason, who's with the SNP, replied the following. So this is an email that he sent back. Yes, I did watch the video and I did not find it very convincing. And I think anything on GBNews should be taken with a pinch of salt. The SNP, and in fact the whole Scottish Parliament, has prioritised children and young people throughout the pandemic. Measures like keeping schools open as much as possible and closing schools as a last resort, masks and improved ventilation, testing, etc., have all been done for the good of our children. He goes on, as you can see on the screen there, and he kind of says it would be very unwise to lift all restrictions at this point. However, if things continue to improve, then hopefully restrictions can be gradually lifted. Well, John Mason, I was pretty disgraced actually by your, pretty angry, should I say, more accurately, by your response. Now, not because you criticised GBNews and you inaccurately smear it, that is indeed your choice. Everyone can have an opinion on the channel and each to their own and all that. The thing that angered me, John Mason, was your casual kind of dismissiveness of the experience that you'd witnessed. You almost called the girl a liar. And this is what I've found so often throughout this pandemic. So many rules and restrictions have been put onto children. So just in case you're not aware, in Scotland, secondary school children, so those that are kind of 11, 12 years upwards, have been made to wear masks all day long at school since September 2020. 16 months. And I'm just going to say that again. For 16 months, and it continues to this day, children as young as 11 years old are being made to wear masks in school all day long. So we're talking about 7 hours. If you live in a rural area, you've got to wear them on your, your buses and your transport. So it goes on for hours. And I actually think it's akin to child abuse now, because surely you're not basing these policies on science. We've seen many reports now which says that actually the evidence that these things make any difference whatsoever in schools is inconclusive. I mean, there was a report, I think it was by the Department of Education, and I quote here directly, the evidence of using masks in schools to reduce the spread of COVID is not conclusive. Now, when these people, these members of Parliament, talk about we're doing this to protect the children, let me read you also a second direct quote. The direct COVID-19 health risk to children and young people are very low. Now, I'm sorry, and I have to admit, I've just been shouted at in my ear when I said that this is akin to child abuse for me, but I'm sick of it. And to me, it is akin to child abuse. And this is the problem with many in the media. We sit here and we pontificate about Prosecco and parties, and all the while it is the children that are almost an afterthought, the impact and the effect on them dismissed, and it needs to stop. So John Mason, rather than denying other people's experiences and smearing TV channels, you can have an opportunity, come on this show, talk to the young people, talk to their parents and explain to them what scientific basis you have for making these children spend multiple hours every single day for months on end to protect them apparently from an illness which, as I've just explained, has very little risk of causing them serious harm. You're welcome Anytime. And breathe. Sorry about that. I did have to get that off my chest. Anyone on my panel got any thoughts on school restrictions and children? Anyone disagree with me? I'm looking at you, Ben Habib.
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I think this notion that children needed protection is completely wrong. It's a fallacy. And the wearing of masks by children was actually the first time in history of which I'm aware that children were in fact having to take measures which were detrimental to them to protect adults. Normally, it's our job as adults to protect children. And we've reversed that in the pandemic. And we've made them feel guilty. I heard Sophie speak on Nana's programme beforehand, and she's absolutely right. We sort of vilified children because they pass on the virus. It's completely wrong.
Stella?
I think that wearing masks in school is a failure of the government to actually do what they should have done, which is to make sure that all the rooms were properly ventilated. We've known, as you say, for 20 months that ventilation is the key. You could have put a ventilator in every classroom, no masks. And instead, children were wearing masks, and then in January and February, they're being taught in with the windows open. I think it's crazy. I mean, I think we should be keeping schools open. We should be keeping children safe. And the way to do it is to actually put proper ventilation in. And that's the way to do it.
Alistair?
I think the worrying thing about this is that we now know fairly conclusively that masks haven't had that much of an effect. I mean, the research that the government produced a few weeks ago fairly conclusively showed that. And yet, even now, as we've had the instruction to get rid of the masks in schools, we see this week that all sorts of schools still want to retain children wearing them. And I think it's just an indication of how difficult it's going to be to move on to this out of this pandemic situation. I think it's going to be a real struggle to win back some of the freedoms and get rid of all this protective apparatus that has been put in place over the last 2 years.
Yeah, and what I found fascinating, and I get told off in my ear sometimes, but I get very heated about it. I get very passionate about this. I'm a mum myself. My child is absolutely not affected by these mask mandates. He's way too young. But I just think it is an absolute disgrace that these children when I sit and I think for 16 months, day in, day out, 7 hours a day, 6-7 hours a day, including your commute to school, and you're asking these children to sit there, they can't learn properly, they can't communicate properly, they can't interact properly. And I just think, who do you think you are? Forcing this onto them. And then when you're presented with evidence, you can tell that this John Mason's really got on my nerves tonight with his response. But when he's presented with an evidence of a young person giving their experience, his response is to say, oh, well, I didn't actually find that convincing. And you need to kind of take that with a pinch of salt. What you should be doing, John Mason, and all the others like you, by the way, this is not a lone man. You're not a lone individual here. What you should be doing is, instead of dismissing these young people's experiences, you should be paying absolute attention to them. You should be getting rid of these ridiculous mask guidelines, mandates, whatever you want to call them. And you should be looking in the mirror and saying, actually, I feel a little bit ashamed, quite frankly, of what I've done to these children. And I'd be well inclined, actually, to try and move life on. And by the way, it's not just Scotland that's doing this, because lots of you guys have been in touch with me since this Plan B restrictions have been lifted to tell me that your schools here in England, you've still got headmasters that even though the government restrictions have lifted, the headmasters are still insisting that their kids wear these masks. Honestly, some people, I'm pretty sure of it, they just don't want this COVID thing to end, I'm sure of it. Anyway, I've got to be honest with you all, I wasn't even supposed to be talking about this tonight. I'm supposed to be talking about the NHS, but I just couldn't let that fly. And more in the media, as I say, we need to stop talking about things like Prosecco and passes and start focusing on things like this. These children, I know I am going to move on. If I get told one more time in my ear to move on, I know I need to move on. Right, let's move on, shall we? A trial in Norfolk will see some hospital patients moved into a hotel to free up beds after the local health service there declared a critical incident. Up to 15 patients will receive care at a city centre hotel in a pilot scheme that will last 3 months. NHS Norfolk and Waveney Clinical Commissioning Group has said. But what do you think to this? We take somebody who is not ill enough to be in a hospital but not well enough to go home, and we put them into a hotel. It makes no sense to me, because if you're going to send carers to these people in a hotel, why don't you just put them in the house and send the carers there? Anyway, Alistair, your thoughts?
Well, there's all sorts of potential ways to resolve this, isn't there? I mean, it's on a basic level, it seems to me that from a clinical perspective, someone goes into hospital ill and they need a certain type of treatment in hospital, and then they get to a certain stage in recovery and they can move on to something else. We know from what's gone on in the last couple of years that the level of care and carers going out to homes, that's been a service in chaos for a couple of years. So that's one of the impacts of this pandemic. Whether putting them into a hotel, and it's not just Norfolk, there's been several places, I think, over the last few weeks that have explored this solution. That may well be a useful temporary solution. The bigger problem, though, the underlying problem is that the NHS does seem to be permanently in crisis. And we never seem to be able to resolve these issues, because it always needs saved, it always needs protected, but we never get to the nitty-gritty of actually understanding what the kind of healthcare system that we need is. And I think that's partly because it's stuck in a private versus public. On the one hand, we're told private isn't good enough and it needs to be public, and others want to privatise elements of it. But the core element of the health service seems to be a hopeless mess of kind of various different types of service delivery that doesn't seem to have any cohesive plan at the centre as to what actually is required. And that's gone on for years now. It's gone on in a way that the pandemic planning was done 10 years ago, and the results showed it wasn't going to be good enough. And sure enough, when we hit a pandemic, this is the outcome. So we need a kind of a basic level of fundamental rethink of what the NHS is, I think, but no one seems to be prepared to do that.
Scarlett?
I think in principle it's a really good idea, but it's a very old idea, because they used to be called cottage hospitals. And in Swanage in Dorset, where my family lives, all my siblings live, there is a cottage hospital. And when my father had open heart surgery at the age of 84, and my sister said he cannot be released after 3 days because he was no longer acute. My 79-year-old mother couldn't look after him. He was in the cottage hospital for 2 weeks. He was cared for. Anybody could visit him, and then he went home. So he didn't go back into hospital. It's a fantastic idea, but it's a very, very old idea. In the 50s, that's what you had, is that you were in hospital for when you were acute, and then you got released before you were able to go home. And I completely understand what you're saying about carers, but actually somebody coming out of a major operation needs to have carers. I mean, the thing about that hospital is they were there all the time, but it was very low level. And what happened? We closed them all down. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible mistake.
What was the reason for closing them down, before I go back to Ben?
Obviously money. I mean, let's leave the acute hospitals, let's leave all the important thing. And as always, the Cinderella services, the less urgent services got cut. And I mean, they got cut through the 80s, just more and more and more. And actually, it was really, really necessary. And I think it's a good idea. I probably agree with you that why you have it in a hotel that is not set up for that sort of thing is crazy. But I can tell you, Swanage Cottage Hospital, completely brilliant. My brother-in-law died in there of cancer. That's where my sister said that she'd like him to be. It was fantastic, and that's what we need.
Ben Habib.
Well, I think it's the fact that we had Nightingale hospitals last year, now we've got Hilton ones. I think that really plays to Alistair's point, that we've got fundamental problems with the NHS that simply haven't been addressed over years and years and years. And, a lot of people may be looking at their screens now and saying, well, Ben, for goodness sake, we've had a pandemic. It's put the NHS under stress. We were bound to emerge from it in difficulties. But actually, government's had 22 months to prepare for what it knew would be an extra burden on the NHS. The government's been warned again and again and again that its predilection with treating COVID over everything else is bound to increase waiting times, bound to increase numbers waiting for treatment. We had 4 million people before the pandemic. We've now got 6 million people on the waiting list forecast to go to 8 million. The government needs to get the bull by its horns and to address this problem head on. One of the criticisms I have of the Conservative Party and their governance over the last 11 years is that they've treated, 12 years now nearly, is that they've treated the NHS as a kind of just-in-time business. They're proud of the efficiency of the NHS. And what they mean by efficiency is that it's got no ability to deal with structural overload. And we've seen that with the pandemic. And they should have learnt that over the last 22 months, and they should have foreseen this. We built the Nightingale hospitals, we never used them, we shut them down, and now we've moved to Hilton hotels.
We did build the Nightingales, but the reason that they weren't really leveraged was because the staffing wasn't there.
Yeah, it wasn't. And in fact, actually, also, Michelle, by the time we discovered how best to treat this ailment, how to treat COVID, we realised the equipment we put in Nightingale hospitals wasn't fit for purpose. And on top of all that, if things aren't bad enough already with the NHS, we're now going to enforce a vaccine mandate, which may result in a lot of them losing their jobs. So they're just compounding the problems for the NHS. They need to get this bull by the horns.
Yeah, you've also there, Ben, you've strayed into another passion project of mine about this NHS staff mandate. But to save all my viewers' ears, I won't embark on another rant. It's not even 6:30 yet. So I'll try and keep to one rant a night, shall I? But yeah, that is a topic we'll be talking about in great detail, actually, on Monday's show, the NHS mandates. And by the way, if anyone's listening to Ben Habib and he's saying about from Nightingales to the Hilton, I've got a bit of bad news for you, because if you are in Norfolk and you're thinking, oh, aye, the Hilton, it's not actually the Hilton, it is the Holiday Inn that's doing this. So if you're in Norfolk and you're getting moved into one of these hotels, if you've ever stayed at the Hilton and then you've stayed in the Holiday Inn, you'll know that there is a little bit of a difference, to put it mildly. Peter has emailed in and he said, exactly what you're saying, Scarlett. This is what local community hospitals used to be for. With them operational, it would all be fine. Someone else has said NHS needs to start saying no to patients who don't really need to be in hospital. Yeah, but what do we do with them? This is the question, and the answer perhaps is this kind of cottage hospital, to quote you, Scarlett. Do you agree with it though? There's a poll running on GBNews Twitter. Let me know. Do you agree with this kind of sentiment of people that are almost halfway between a hospital and home, putting them into a hotel? It seems really weird to me, because I just think, why don't you send them home with care? But what do I know? If you want to involve yourself in that conversation, that poll, go on to our Twitter at GBNews and let me know your thoughts. Right, going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to talk to you about how much stuff we throw away. I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs and Co. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and for the benefit of you that are listening and not watching, a quick reminder of who my panel tonight is. We've got Ben Habib, who's the CEO of the First Property Group and a former Brexit Party MEP. We've got Alistair Donald, who's the Associate Director of the Academy of Ideas, and former Labour advisor, Scarlett Maguire. Which leads me nicely, actually. I'm going to, the director of this show must really kind of hate me, or at least he will by the end of the programme, because I'm randomly adding in different topics. Oh, he says he doesn't in my ear. But I'm randomly adding in different topics. I'm going with the flow a little bit tonight. It's Friday, why not? Because, Scarlett, you are a former Labour advisor. I found it quite interesting what happened a few days ago with Christian Wakeford, who defected over to Labour.
Yeah.
I think the guy is a monumental hypocrite. He campaigned for rule changes to force a by-election in the case of a defection. He then defected and comfortably took his new position in the Labour Party. I think it's outrageous. I think he should do what he wants to do, or what he wanted to do, and get himself up there for a by-election.
Well, I think he'd win a by-election. I don't know his problem.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, yes. Come on, we're 13 points ahead. I mean, and in the
But you're assuming that he would be selected as the candidate.
They would make sure he was selected as the candidate. The Labour Party and the Conservative Party they're interested in power. They're interested in winning. Of course he'd be selected as the candidate.
He said some awful things about the Labour Party.
Yeah, I know. And so have many other people, and so have other people who've changed. But actually, I mean, what's interesting about it is that the Westminster Village go, oh, this has shored up the Conservatives. It's fantastic. Actually, for the rest of the country, to have a Labour person going over to the Tories is the biggest message you can have. It's better than any slogan, any Keir speech, anything. Is somebody saying, actually, I want to join Labour.
No, he's not saying that. He's saying, I'm worried about my job and I'm going to manoeuvre to try and keep it.
He's saying, I think the Tories are losers. That's what he's saying. I think Boris is a loser, and I think that's the message he's sending out. I think it's very interesting.
Some of his new colleagues have had some non-complimentary things to say about him, it has to be said, and the woman that stood in the last election also was a bit miffed that he's waltzed in and said that he shouldn't necessarily have the right to stand in the next election. So there is a battle going on there. But even more importantly, I think a lot of the people of Bury seem to be a bit miffed that he's just crossed over, and it says a lot when someone crosses from the Tories to the Labour Party, because it's a big move, and people the voters like to feel that having cast their vote, that the person that they voted to represent them for 5 years actually does represent them. And I think people are very annoyed, a lot of them, that he's taken it out of their hands.
He's political toast. The people of Bury will not forgive him. And if he's got the confidence of their support, he should stand for by-election straight away.
Well, as I said, I'm quite happy to have him as by-election. But actually, probably a lot of the people of Bury voted Tory because, and lots of them had voted Labour before it was the first time, and they are angry. I mean, you can tell they are angry that there's been no levelling up, that promises have been broken, that parties and Prosecco has been had. And actually,
how can you level up in the middle of a pandemic? I think everyone's been unrealistic to Boris Johnson. You've got a pandemic, the world's on its absolute knees. What do people expect Boris Johnson to do?
Well, maybe not have parties throughout, but there is no question that there's this fury, and actually, just because he was Tory doesn't mean that they do feel. I mean, there's the tribalism in Labour and Tories is massive, but actually for real people, for real voters, they're not, I'm Labour till I die, I'm Tory till I die.
No,
for most voters, I'm going to vote for the person who's going to do me the best. And actually, if he says, look, this isn't working. What we need is another Prime Minister.
He has to go back to the people of Bury.
I'm not arguing with you. I'm perfectly happy for him to have a by-election.
He's refused to do that, and that's why I think he's political toast. And if he wanted to damage the Conservative Party, actually he had the net effect of doing the opposite. He galvanised support behind the Prime Minister.
Which is not good for the Conservative Party.
And
the
it wasn't,
quicker Boris
not
Johnson
good for the people
goes,
of Bury.
the better it
and
is
not
for
good for the people of Bury.
Well, if you're watching, Christian, get yourself listening to me. Don't listen to Scarlett. Get yourself on the by-election, that's what I think. That's what he wanted. You don't want to be a hypocrite these days, do you, Scarlett? If you campaign...
I have said 3 times, Michelle, I'm perfectly happy for him to have a by-election.
Oh, good. I thought you were saying...
No, I haven't disagreed. But I think what I said was, I think he'd win a by-election. I think he'd win a by-election, right?
See, I don't. I think that... do you know what I would love to happen? And maybe I'm just in a really nasty mood today. I don't know why. Maybe I just got out of bed the wrong side. But you know what I would love to happen? I said this the other day, actually. I'd love for him to trigger a by-election. And then I would love for the Labour Party not to select him as their candidate. That would really make me happy. I would, honestly. I'd absolutely love it, because I am getting a little bit fed up of these politicians playing silly games to putting their own self-interest first, when actually they're supposed to be putting the people that they represent first. Anyway, I promise you I'll try and get in a better mood as the show goes on. Let's talk about food wastage, shall we? There's more than £1 billion worth of fruit and veg and bread binned in the UK every single year. 1 in 5 of us, when asked, say that the reason why we're doing it is because we don't know how to cook. 76 million items, that's on average 3 a household, are thrown away every single week. This was a big poll that was conducted, and consumers said that they did feel guilty about throwing the food away, but said they would reduce their food wastage if they knew more recipes. Is that an excuse? Of course not, because we live in an era where there's a thing called Google. And if you want to know recipes, get on there. Ben Habib.
Well, I think it's a testimony, funnily enough, to 40 years of economic growth. And we've become so rich and so lazy that we're basically... we indulge our desire for instant gratification by buying ready meals, by buying fresh tomatoes for a salad, and once they go a bit manky, we don't really care what we do with them. We chuck them straight in the bin. And the other problem here, I think, is sell-by and eat-by dates. When we were children, we had a kind of smell test for food. We didn't go by what it said on the plastic. And my own children, if they're probably watching the programme, my own children will look at a packet, they'll look at the sell-by date and go, "Daddy, this needs to go in the bin." And I go, "Well, darling, have you smelt it?" And that just doesn't cross their, thinking. So, I think this is symptomatic of actually a very wealthy society. We're not alone in the developed world in having this sort of behaviour. And it's got to stop. If we really care about the environment, we've got to look at the environment in a broader sense. And part of that is stopping waste, food wastage.
Indeed, Alistair?
Well, I do think it's a byproduct, as Ben said, of kind of economic advance over the years. But I don't think it's because people are lazy, really. I just think that we've reorganised the way that we buy food, and we have convenient shopping. We can buy a couple of weeks in advance and store it and all the rest of it. And that day-to-day buying of things is long since gone. So you don't necessarily, there's no close relationship between buying something and eating something. You amass these things at home, and then you decide as you go on what it is that you want to eat. And sometimes your decisions make no sense a couple of weeks later, sometimes they do. So I just think it's a byproduct of advance. But the thing that worries me slightly about this story is I think there's a slightly nasty sort of moralistic undertone to it, reading about it. So there's a kind of, definitely an element of you wasteful humans, kind of moralistic scorning about it, which I think is not a good thing. And there's also, reading between the lines, there is a kind of austerity mentality that's shining through in this discussion, because if waste is a byproduct of our economic advance and the fact we've all become wealthier, what's happening now, post-pandemic is people are starting to think, well, we really need to screw down the hatches a little bit and we really need to rein ourselves in a little bit. And I think some of this story is about preparing people for hard times ahead and a bit of finger pointing and saying, well, you need to be a bit more thoughtful. And you know, that's not a good thing, I think, because ultimately I think wealth is a good thing and we should celebrate the fact that we can be a bit wasteful.
That's my phone. That'll be my mum telling me. That'll be my mum telling me about food wastage or something, I imagine.
And how bad you were at it.
Yeah. Well, actually, I don't think I am too bad. But you tell me what you're like.
It made me feel guilty. You know, I sometimes buy too many oranges and then I forget to eat them and they're in the fruit bowl over there. But actually, I mean, I think 3 items a week isn't very much. If you think about it. I mean, but I remember, I think the way people shop is really interesting. I mean, when my son comes and stays with me, he brings masses and masses of food and he's a great cook, but I am then left with masses and masses of food that he doesn't cook. He's a very generous shopper, and there are just ways of doing it. I mean, I do shop. I don't shop most days, but I consider that I'm really lazy because I'm a convenience shopper. I have shops at either end of my road, and I go, oh, I think today I fancy this. So I think it's everything. But I really think to get cross about 3 things. But when I was young, they did teach cooking in school. And I think that, and this has been a debate, and food people are forever saying you should teach cooking. And no, you know, boys are taught metalwork and woodwork. But actually, teaching cooking is something that everybody can do. And because of that, yeah, you know, I know how to do a roux sauce. I know how to do all those basics. And then...
You know how to do a what?
It's called a roux sauce. It's a white sauce with flour.
Did you just say, I know how to do a roux sauce, therefore the basics?
Well, it is a basic. It's a white sauce.
A roux sauce. I know how to do a roux sauce. There you go. And I think, Ben Habib, I think you're spot on, actually, when it comes to labelling and sell-by dates and things like that, because it is, I think, a lot of people just look at something, read the date, and then in the bin it goes. It's like eggs, for example. Do you know how to tell if an egg's off?
You float it in water, don't you? Or if it floats, it's off.
There you go. You see, that's what you do. You're very smart, you are, Ben. I was hoping that all of my panel was going to look at me blankly when I asked that question. Then I was going to explain how you tell whether or not an egg is off, but they all know, so that's very good. And I hope you do at home, by the way, because eggs, I don't know why, I've got a thing about eggs, about throwing away eggs. You shouldn't go by the date. You should go, as Ben Habib says, about whether or not it floats in water. There you go, Dewbs and Co. Every day we try to educate and inform you. Right, it's going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'll be talking about e-scooters. What do you think to them? Are they a hindrance or are they the future?
On Mark Dolan tonight, my Mark Meets guest is legendary British Olympic swimmer Sharon Davies. In the big question, have lockdown skeptics been proven right? Adele lets down her fans and Joe Biden loses the plot again. We'll get reaction from US commentator Kinsey Schofield. And in my big opinion, too many people don't want this pandemic to end. Plus, another We Feel Your Pain. Tonight featuring TV host Jeremy Vine. See you at 9.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Just a quick reminder for those listening who the panel are. We've got Ben Habib, the CEO of First Property Group and a former Brexit Party MEP. We've got Alistair Donald, who is the Associate Director of the Academy of Ideas. And we've got Scarlett Maguire, who is the former Labour advisor. Lee, by the way, has emailed in, and I think Lee raises a really good point when it comes to food wastage. What he says is when you're single, you basically cannot buy many of the items that you need as singular, loose items. So you end up buying lots of stuff and then wasting it. And I think he's absolutely right. You always seem to buy things in twos or in, I don't know if it's apples or whatever he's saying, apples, like 6-packs or whatever. And I've often wondered why there isn't more produce that's created just for a single individual. Someone else, Michelle, has emailed in and said, I agree, kids nowadays are fussy. Well, actually, Michelle, I've got to say, you wrote, I agree, kids nowadays are fussy wasters, but I think you mean eaters, and it's your autocorrect there. Anyway.
I was really fussy. I mean, I think there's nothing new about fussy eaters. I was very fussy. My daughter was so fussy that when she went on a play date, they said, just tell us the food she eats because the list will be much shorter than the ones that she doesn't eat.
Really?
She now eats everything. Yeah.
But you see, I've got a baby and I will try and get him to eat pretty. I know, but I make him try absolutely everything.
So did I.
And just because I think, I don't really, no offence to you, but I don't really like fussy eaters. I just think, get on with it. Eat what's put in front of you.
I know, but they grow out of it.
Oh, good. Good. Well, there you go. Fussy eaters. Yeah. If someone sent a kid to my child's party and was like, oh, he won't eat this, or he won't eat that, or he will eat this, I've got to say, I probably wouldn't invite that kid again. Anyway, let's talk about e-scooters, shall we? What do you think to these things? Got to confess, I've got one. I've had one for quite some time, actually, and I love it. But apparently, they're turning pavements into a jungle. That's according to a Conservative baroness, and she's saying that their widespread use generates fear and urgent action needs to be taken before more lives are lost. She's added that motorised scooters are fueling what she calls a wild west of lawlessness and should either be banned or strictly regulated. Ben Habib's laughing to my right-hand side. If you just heard that little chortle, that's what it was. It was Ben Habib. What do we think to this? Alistair, tell me what your thoughts are.
Well, I don't know anybody who doesn't get irritated by e-scooters slamming around the pavement, knocking people flying and things like that. I mean, people just don't like it. And I can understand that. I mean, it is a bit irritating. But ban them? I mean, that's surely an overreaction. In fact, it's telling that our first reaction to anything these days seems to be to raise the possibility of banning it or regulating it. Arguably, it's the whole sort of licensing of everything that goes on in our streets and our cities that's part of the problem, because we're always looking to the rules for, the law and the rules and the bylaws for an indication of how to behave, rather than just getting on with interacting with each other on a kind of normal basis according to the kind of codes of conduct that we've long held for how you relate to each other in public space. So I think the banning thing is an overreaction. The whole thing about e-scooters, though, it has to be said, it's strange that e-scooters have become the thing, because it's definitely the case that as we seem to have lost the ability to plan our transport systems. We've diverted attention into how people can cycle more and how people can walk more and how people can use e-scooters more. And actually what we could do is just with a bit of decent transport planning for how people get about a bit more, faster and quicker and more efficiently. And then rather than shoving people into using e-scooters, just give us a decent transport system. I mean, I can go into work, I can walk the 3 miles to work quicker than I can get public transport. That can't be very good in the 21st
No,
century.
indeed. Scarlett, are you a secret e-scooter user?
No, I'm not, and I would like them, like bicycles, off my pavements. I just think pavements are for people and e-scooters are really dangerous. I'm perfectly happy to have e-scooters in cycle lanes, on the road. That's fine. I look at people on e-scooters as when I'm bicycling and they overtake me and I think these people are mad, but that's fine. That's their business. But what I don't understand is technically they're banned, right? Technically they are banned from pavements and from the roads. And you see them all the time. So it's really stupid having a law that doesn't work. But no, I think that on the pavements, I do not want to be run over by an e-scooter, and I don't like people, particularly almost always young men, bicycling down a pavement.
Ben Habib?
Well, I don't know whether an e-scooter is a vehicle or a pedestrianised mode of transport. So I'm slightly confused about whether they're allowed on pavements or, whether they should be on the road. If you walk across a road, you're jaywalking unless you do it properly. If you ride a bicycle on a pavement, you're breaking the law. But I think e-scooters are legal, aren't they? You just have to use the hired ones at 15.5 miles an hour or something.
I think so. What they do is they've got trial schemes that allow them to be legal in various areas, and then you're allowed to use them on private land in other places. So I think it varies depending on where you are. But
so where do you use yours?
Depends who's listening. If anyone in law enforcement is listening, then obviously I only use them in my own back garden, Scarlett. But you can't, to me, I just think you can't blame the scooter for reckless behaviour. So when you see these kind of people that people are describing on pavements and there's 2 kids on it, they've de-restricted the speed and they're going too fast or they're jumping, and that's not the scooter's fault, it's the person's fault. So banning the scooter, to me, just seems a little bit of overkill. But what I would probably think about, and I'm veering off topic a little bit, is the insurance for these things. Because if I drive a car, I've got to be insured. I've got to be insured against, I don't know...
Third-party liability.
Yeah, exactly. So why don't we have some form of insurance on bicycles, e-scooters? Why not? So you've got a push bike. If you come too close to my car, Scarlett, and you scratch my car...
They take my... But you're much more likely to have the car drive into me, right?
Yeah, but if I'm stationary at the lights and a push bike comes alongside me and scratches the side of my car and you pedal off through the red light as cyclists often do...
Unlike an e-scooter person.
Well, I don't know, because I only use mine in my own garden, as we were just discussing.
But why they're not allowed in bike lanes is a mystery. I mean, God, there's so many bike lanes these days.
Well, they go down the road, don't they? I've seen e-scooters down the road.
Yeah, they do. I saw a couple of e-scooters driving past police the other day, actually, and the police just ignored it.
Absolutely. No, it's a mad law because it doesn't work. Right? I mean, because nobody pays any attention to it at all.
But there's another thing about e-scooters which I think we shouldn't pass over. It's the aesthetic. You look like a bit of an uprightiest plonker on an e-scooter.
Speak for yourself, Ben Habib.
I mean, cyclists look like...
I look like a cool
It's also upright. It's almost like you're on some sort of self-righteous trip.
Oh, I think I look like a cool individual. I think they're the future, and I want them everywhere and anywhere. Nick, who's watching, he's emailed in and said these things are unsafe and totally dangerous. David says young people need to walk instead of being lazy. That might improve their health, he goes on. Lee says e-scooters are a menace on the pavements. And Anthony says pedestrians already suffer the menace of cyclists riding on the pavements, and e-scooters will just make it worse. OK, then no e-scooters on pavements for anyone. I think that was the verdict there. Lots of you getting in contact about food wastage, by the way. The whole sniff test, that's getting a lot of love, Ben Habib. People are saying about sniffing your food to check whether or not it goes off. If you do that, let me know. Do either of you two do that, sniff test?
If I think the milk's
Look
out of
at them
date,
going
then I'm not going to
quiet.
drink it before
Make out that no, they don't. I just think it's sensible.
No, I think it's. No, I certainly think it's true with milk. I mean, no, I just don't. I was just thinking that I sort of eat food quite fast.
Do you?
Yeah, I mean, apart from my real problem is satsumas, which I love and never eat enough of, and then they sort of go mouldy quite fast. I do think that if a fruit is mouldy, you can throw it out without thinking about it.
Well, I'll tell you what else goes fast, not just Scarlett's eating. The programme, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'll very quickly ask you about this. You might have seen it, the Department of Transport, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, he's had enough, basically, of excessive train tannoys, wants to quieten things down a little bit on train journeys. What do you reckon to this? I've got to say that actually I think tannoy announcements are helpful and handy, but are they too much? And do we really need the government to be thinking about tannoy announcements? I mean, it's not like they've got anything better to do. Anyone got any deep, interesting thoughts that they're desperate to share with the nation about tannoys before we go?
Well, most of them are not informative in any way. They're just relentless barrage of I mean, I'm for this, actually. It's one of the things that, yeah, get rid of lots of the announcements. They're completely unnecessary. But to be honest, I'd far rather they got better trains and improved the transport system than twiddled around with tannoy announcements.
I think it's useful for them to do it about 2 minutes before you get to your station to say we're approaching.
Yeah,
I think that's good. I mean, but yes, in the end, I mean, it really isn't up to Grant Shapps. It's into all the... I mean, we do have this privatised, ridiculous rail system with all these different things, and it's up to each of the companies. But the last train I was on just went on, and I was trying to make a phone call at the time, and it was pretty relentless with, where the buffet car was and all of that stuff.
But you would think Grant Shapps had better things to do this time. Like go to a party.
Well,
I'm sure he likes them a lot.
One of my viewers, Chrissy, has written in saying, I've never been so angry with a GBNews programme, but you are the one. There's quite a few things that Chrissy is unhappy with about the show tonight, but food being thrown away. She's saying, why don't you talk about anyone using food banks? If my bread has got mould on it, I will pull the mould off and reuse it, and the same for the cheese. So when you're talking about throwing things away, you are just talking about the more financially well off. I think that's a fair point, quite frankly, Chrissy. I will take that on the chin, and thank you very much for getting in touch and letting me know your thoughts. Many of you are still getting in contact about e-scooters. There doesn't seem to be many people writing in and telling me that they like them. If you do, then you're in my camp, but it seems that I am severely outvoted. Paul emailed in and said you can have your e-scooter, but basically he wants people to have approved training and wear the correct clothing. Paul, I dread to think what the correct clothing for an e-scooter would be. Ben Habib's already told me I look like a Wally. So if you're going to make me wear the same clothes or approved clothing, I dread to think what I look like. Anyway, I'm being told to shut up because it's the end of the programme. So shut up in just a second, I will. We've had a poll. I asked you about the hospitals and the kind of hotels. The poll results, as it stands, is as follows. Someone's going to tell me the answer any second now in my ear. No, they're not. OK, there you go. I was told to shut up and read the poll, but the poll isn't there. So instead, I'll say thank you very much to my panel this evening, Ben Habib, Alistair Donald and Scarlett Maguire. Thank you very much for your company. And thank you at home for yours. Have yourself a great weekend. And by the way, my last thing, and then I definitely will shut up, when I come back on Monday, I've got a lot to focus on and talk about when it comes to the NHS staff mandate, the no job, no jab policy. I want your thoughts on that, and I'll see you on Monday.
Good evening. It's not as cold out there this evening as yesterday because there's more cloud around. That cloud is going to make for quite a grey weekend for most of us, but a few spots will continue to see a bit of sunshine, and most of us are not going to see any rain thanks to this area of high pressure that's been ambling across the country for the past couple of days and will stick around for much of next week. There are weather fronts approaching the far northwest and across the Highlands, the Western Isles. There will at times be some drizzly rain, certainly through this evening and overnight, but for most it is a dry night, but with a lot of cloud. Still some breaks in the cloud across eastern England, parts of the south, and where those breaks persist, a touch of frost is still going to happen. But for most towns and cities, warmer than last night. That